Hi everyone. I'm going to talk today about an aspect of planning PBLLs that has proven challenging for a number of teachers. So I'm going to explain my thought process to you, but please know that this is a creative process where you will be tailoring what you write to your students and also adjusting that based on the progress that they make throughout each project. So this is a very flexible, very individualized process. I can't tell you exactly how to do it because I don't know your students like you do, but I'll show you how I did it, and hopefully you can follow my thought process. So when you're choosing one of these projects that you'd like to do, you'll find inside that there's a lesson plan. So today we're going to look at a project for our oldest or our most advanced students. So either for high schoolers or adults, or for those who at least speak very fluently. And the project is designing an orbiting space colony. So when you choose the project plan here, what you'll see is this document open up. You'll see that the driving question of this project is, how can a group of humans live in space? So the idea is that they're designing something similar to the International Space Station, but for residential purposes. And I've already completed most of the planning in here. So it shows the different standards that they will be meeting, and it also shows the content and language objectives. Now you'll notice that when I set the language objectives, I have linked them and I have connected them to the other Trello board, which talks to us about competences. So you should be able to find your relevant competences listed in the other Trello board, the competences inventory, and you should find some guidance there on how to teach each competence. So what kind of phrases we're talking about, what kind of actions students are doing with this particular part of language. So in this case, I've chosen 4 language objectives. Now students may learn a lot more than that, but this is my minimum that I am holding myself accountable to and that I'm holding students accountable to. So when I get to my summative assessment, I need to see them performing these 4 things well in the language. I need to see progress on these 4 objectives, or I consider that I didn't meet my goal with the project. I designed the summative assessments to include all 4 of these language objectives, and I have formative assessments which also include all of these, and that means that it should give me a chance to test how they're doing as we go along so that I know whether they are improving on each of those points or not. So these are the 4 points. Now, they're not always numbered, and the numbers don't mean anything about the sequence or anything like that. I've just numbered them for clarity so that we can see how they appear throughout the project. So I've said that at the beginning of the planning process, that these are what I want students to be able to do in the language, and they are related to the topic we're working on. They are related to the building of a space station. They make sense with this project. So now I need to actually teach them to do those things. So on what day, through what activity am I going to teach them to explain a scientific process? On what day, through what activity, are they going to learn how to describe the construction of a place or an object? On what day, through what activities, are they going to learn to use the future and conditional tenses of the language? Of course, this lesson plan is in English, so if it's in Armenian, if it's in another language, you're going to tailor these slightly to what makes sense for the language that they're learning. This is just an English model. So these are their 4 objectives. This is what I want to see them able to do at the end of the project. They can't do that unless I teach them how to do it. And I probably can't teach them how to do it on just one day. I need to teach them how to do that on multiple days. They need to have lots of practice throughout the project so that when they reach the summative assessment, they can do those functions with the language. They're very confident because they've been practicing and practicing and practicing throughout the PBLL. So let's look at where these 4 appear. When I get down to my activities and my input, I have different days listed and what we can do on different days, or perhaps 1 or 2 days would be spent on the same activity. These are different activities, different things we can do during this PBLL that are going to lead to the outcome of designing a space station. So obviously at the end of the project, they're going to be meeting in their group and they're going to be designing. But first I have to teach them how to design. And first they have to ask a lot of questions. They have to learn a lot of information in order to make good decisions for their design. And of course, they have to learn the language that goes with that information so that when they sit with their group to design the space colony, they can talk about it in the target language because they've been practicing the language in my activities that I've been leading them in. So I've listed on this column here, activities, different things that they need to know about, different things that they need to understand in order to design a successful space colony. And then for each one, I've put some links. This is just me researching on Google. Either model lessons that I think are good. I could do the same activity with my students that some other teacher did. Or perhaps here is a video that explains this concept and we could talk about this video in the classroom. So this is a resource I would use on that day during those couple of days. And the column we're going to focus on today is this third one, where it says suggested language chunks. The suggested language chunks are, from when I'm writing the project and giving it to you, they're just suggestions. You can change them. But when you, as the teacher, are creating a PBLL, this is a vital, vital column for you. You have to focus on this. You have to spend time on it. This is where you make your teaching decisions. Okay, the rest of this should come naturally. It should be obvious what kind of things you need to learn about in order to reach the goal, in order for students to solve the problem that has been presented to them. But you as the teacher have to think about what phrases do we use to achieve the tasks that are necessary for the project. So here I have an activity where we will do some art around outer space. So they'll draw something, they'll take photos, they'll create maybe a sculpture or something about outer space. And in doing that, what kind of language can I teach them? So I thought about some keywords that come up and some phrases that come up in artistic activities that are relevant to the whole design of a space colony. And I targeted those as my goals for that day or 2 days. Since it's an art project, it probably takes a couple of days for us to work on it. So what language am I going to be focusing on during that time? What new language is going to be my focus? When I say that it's my focus, what I mean is when that lesson or a couple of lessons is finished, I want them to be confident using those phrases. I want them to understand those phrases, be able to use them in an appropriate setting, pronounce them correctly, use them grammatically. So we're going to use them over and over and over. We're going to play games with them. We're going to have discussions with them. They're going to really master those phrases, those constructions is the technical name, or those chunks is the informal name, so that I'm confident that when they see something that's cloudy, that they know that that's called cloudy, and they're going to use that word. When they see something that's reflecting light, they know that phrase, and they're going to say this is reflecting light. So these are my goals. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking for the whole class period, so that we're going to use lots of other phrases and other words. But these are the ones that I think are new and or challenging for them. These are the ones that I'm going to focus on, that I want them to take away. So these are the ones that are probably going to be on the wall. These are the ones that I'm going to build a game around. These are the ones that I'm going to target, so that they have mastered them when we move forward in the project. And you'll see that I wrote here that this corresponds to my goal number 1 and also to my goal number 4. So let's review what those were. My objective number 1 was that they should be able to explain scientific processes. Look back at these phrases. Something is translucent, something is transparent, something is difficult to see, having a gravitational pull on something, in orbit around something. these are phrases that you need to describe lots of scientific processes that happen in space. Now, these words are not enough to explain a whole scientific process. There's going to be more lessons that are labeled number 1, but they're going to get some of that vocabulary, some of those chunks from this lesson, and they're going to combine them later with other chunks. I also said that it applies to my goal number 4. Let's look at what that was. My goal number 4 was that they should critique things and ask challenging questions. Now, in order to critique things in a scientific setting, you have to know a lot of scientific language and how to use that scientific language. You have to be able to think in scientific terms, because that's how you discover problems, errors, missing elements, and you critique it and you challenge it. So I've marked here that this addresses goal number 4, because these are some phrases that they need to both understand the meaning. They need to know the difference between translucent and transparent, for example. They also need to know how to use phrases like reflecting light or having a gravitational pull on something in order to pose questions. So for example, when we get to the part where we talk about the weight of the space station, they need to ask questions about the weight that it's going to have. And one of those questions at least is going to involve the gravitational pull that it has on other things. So they understand that concept, they can say that phrase, and therefore when we get to talking about weight, they can use that phrase in that discussion, and they can ask critical questions about it. Is this a good idea? Is this a good design or not? So this addresses goal 1 and goal 4. Now remember that when we write out the input and activities, they're not in any order. This isn't necessarily day 1. Could be day 1, but this could be day 15 or day 20. I don't know. This is just a brainstorming of everything we're going to cover during this project. And when we cover that, whenever we cover physical forces, these are going to be some of the phrases that I'm going to target. They're going to be my focal phrases that I want students to master, because I want students to be strong in discussing science and technical questions in the target language. So this is how they're going to do that. So whenever we cover physical forces, whether it's day 1, day 5, day 20, I have some resources here that I can use to design that lesson. So the lesson is not designed yet. This is just an idea for a lesson, for an activity. And then here's some language that we should cover, that they should master. They should master expansion. They should master contraction in the form of a gas, in the form of a liquid, something pushing on something, something pulling on something. They should be able to use all these phrases accurately. They should know when to use them. They should pronounce them correctly, and they should use them in a grammatical fashion. That shows me that they've mastered these phrases. Of course, there will be other phrases we will use in those lessons, but these are the ones that I believe my students need to walk away with. I believe these are new and or challenging for my students. I believe these are relevant to the topic and will help them to complete the final project, that will help them to build their space station, design their space station. And I believe that these are very useful. These are things that they're going to say over and over and over again. They're not just going to say them on one day. So there are phrases that they're going to say on one day. And those phrases can just be written somewhere, and I can just say them and explain what they are, and we can just use them. But the phrases that are going in here that are my focal chunks, those are the ones I want students to master. At the end of this program, they can use them freely. They're fluent in these phrases. Okay, that's the difference here. So these are my target phrases. And that's why I say that this will evolve as you teach the students, because you'll find out that the critical mass of something is a phrase they already know from a previous PBLL. They got it, you don't need to focus on it. Or you'll find out that they're really not mastering it, it's too difficult for them. So you find something more manageable that can serve that purpose that you teach them. Or you teach that one over and over and over throughout the project because you really want them to get it. You as the teacher make the decision. These are preliminary plans. These are my first draft of my plans. I will make changes as the project progresses in real life. And of course, I will make some changes already when I start to sequence the project. Here, there's no sequence, it's just a list of ideas. When I put them into sequence, it will become clear to me that some things need to come before other things. As a teacher, I can make those decisions. When we study atmosphere, we're going to be talking about what is the atmosphere composed of. So we're going to talk about something being composed of something else. We're going to talk about something consisting of something else. We're going to talk about which percentage of the atmosphere is helium, is nitrogen, etc. We're going to talk about what is oxygen combined with. These are phrases that they need to know. These are scientific phrases. They are appropriate to the field that we are working in, and these are advanced students. So I expect them to be able to use scientific language when they talk about science. But these are also very, very useful phrases that we use all the time in life. They're a little bit formal. They're a little bit academic, but they're very, very common phrases, and we want students to master them. Now, I've marked here that this covers objective number 2. So let's look back at what my objective number 2 was. Describing construction. So we're going to be describing how to build, how this space colony should be built. That's a big part of this project. In order to describe how it's going to be built, we're going to be using these kind of phrases. In order, you know, oxygen is necessary for life, therefore the atmosphere within the space colony must consist of a certain percentage of oxygen, etc. This is going to be used when they describe the construction. These phrases are not enough to describe construction, but they are moving in that direction. They're going to help. So students are going to master them over a couple of days, and they're going to keep coming back through spiral sequencing throughout the project, so that when students describe the construction of their space colony that they designed, they will be able to correctly, clearly, grammatically use these phrases to describe that space colony. So those phrases are connected to goal number 2. So as you move through this example project, you'll see that there are multiple days in which we address goal number 4, objective number 4. There are multiple days in which we address objective number 1. Of course, I'm going to do the sequencing later and decide what comes first, but we want spiral sequencing. So we want to address things and then come back to them, and address things and come back to them, and address things and come back to them. So there should be a spiral effect throughout your project where the same goal is being built up over time, over time, over time. It's being built up until suddenly students are able to combine all the things they've been practicing and perform with the language really strongly. And that's what you will measure when you're doing your formative assessments. Have they been learning them? Can they combine them? Are they using them strongly? And of course, when you get to the very end of the project, you'll have summative assessments, which is their last chance to show you how much they have mastered those things. If they have not mastered them very well, if they don't use them correctly, don't say them clearly, or don't use them grammatically, then there are two explanations for that matter to you. And I know that your first one is going to be, well, the student didn't try, the student didn't pay attention. Well, that's not a solvable problem, and there's no way to prove whether they tried or not. So take that one and delete it from your mind, because it's an unhelpful way of thinking. It's not productive. There are 2 things that are productive. Either the design of this project wasn't tailored to the needs of the students. So perhaps I needed to use easier language. Maybe I needed to use more advanced language. Maybe I needed to move faster. Maybe I needed to move slower. Something in the design and the planning that needed to be different for the students' needs. Or my technique of presenting things was not an effective technique. Those are the 2 explanations about which I can do something. So I have to choose one of those 2. Maybe it's both. If my technique was not effective, perhaps there was not enough repetition. There should be more repetition than is comfortable. There should be an uncomfortable amount of repetition. Remember that it took you 6 years to learn your first language. We're trying to move faster. So lots of repetition. Perhaps I wasn't using spoken language well enough, so their pronunciation wasn't coming from my pronunciation, it was coming from what they wrote down, which meant that they mispronounced things. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe there's a problem with how clear it is. Maybe I'm not doing enough gestures or using enough images. So when they hear me use a phrase, they're not getting what I mean, so that phrase isn't sticking. I don't know. Think about it. Go back and analyze it. What could you change to get them to the goals that you had by the time you get to the summative assessments? And when you have those reflections about what worked well and what didn't work well, you come to the bottom of the planning sheet and you write those down. Pluses are things that worked well. Students definitely mastered this. This was a great activity. It was very effective. Deltas are things you should change. This activity, they didn't master anything. They forgot everything. I kept trying to teach this phrase. It was too difficult for their level. I tried to teach that phrase, but they forgot it. So I should have done more repetition, something like that. And you make these notes so that when you use this PBLL the next year, you'll remember what you needed to change. And other teachers can also benefit from that when you share it on the Trello board. So we'll share it on the PBLL board, and other teachers can take your work, try it in their classroom, and then share what successes they have. So that's how you should be designing this column of the suggested language chunks. Remember, they should be chunks. Sometimes a chunk is a word, but a lot of times it's a phrase. So you need to listen to yourself saying that phrase and find out how is it used. Teach the whole grammar of the phrase. Teach it as a construction. Remember that here you're only listing the focal chunks. Obviously, you're going to say many things. You're going to say hundreds of things. But what are the things you want students to master? What are the things that they should be able to use with confidence at the end of this activity? If the activity is 1 day, there should not be more than 7 listed. 5 to 7 is how many new chunks we can learn in a day, according to research. If it's a couple of days that you're working on this, you can have a couple of more, but you want a lot of repetition, so you can't just throw hundreds of phrases at them. They can't absorb that. You need to limit it to really, really useful ones that are just a little bit above their level. So challenging, but not too challenging. So this is where you decide that. And once again, you edit that as the project goes along. As you're moving through day to day, you decide, you take out things that aren't necessary, you add things that you notice they don't know, you respond to what you're seeing from students, and you adjust the language chunks that you're going to target the next day. But at the end of the PBLL, you have to check, have they learned all of the chunks that they need? Do all of these chunks, if they master them, or if they master most of them, do those add up to being able to do your summative assessment successfully? And do they cover all of the language objectives that you set out? Because they can't do the language objectives, they can't acquire the skill unless you teach it. And you can't just teach it once. It has to be woven through. It has to come back in a spiral fashion. And if you haven't taught all of those skills, then you can't expect them to be successful on the summative assessments, on the final product. So you have to ask yourself a lot of questions as you plan this. You have to go back and forth, looking and thinking, have I prepared them for the performance that I would like to see them do? If you would like individualized help with this, please book an individual appointment with me and I will be happy to work with you.